Hello and welcome to this Candidates Forum for Ward Two Ward Councilor. The general municipal election will be held on Tuesday, November 7th. I'm Jen Adams, the news director of Newton News at NewTV. I will serve as the moderator today. This forum is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Newton and NewTV. I will now read the League's vision statement on fair, respectful, and transparent elections in Newton. We envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. To honor this vision and to protect the strength of our local democratic process, the League of Women Voters of Newton urges all residents involved in Newton's electoral process, whether as a voter, supporter, organizer, or candidate, to encourage respect for candidates and voters in all that you say and do. Maintain a high level of integrity and reliability in all campaign activities. Ensure that communications are relevant, truthful, and fact-based. Become educated on the issues that are important to Newton's residents. Be open to honest debate. Maintain civility as we focus on our shared interest in Newton's future. As we encourage everyone to participate in our democracy, we likewise encourage all to show one another courtesy and respect when speaking, listening, online, and otherwise engaging, especially when there may be a disagreement. And now on to our forum. The League is responsible for communicating with candidates and organizing the format, questions, and moderators. NewTV's primary role is facilitating production and dissemination of the forums. Members of the League of Women Voters of Newton may become candidates for public office. While the League encourages their members to become politically active, there are specific procedures in place to ensure the integrity of their forums and fulfill their commitment to being a nonpartisan organization that does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. Please be assured that all efforts are made to create a wall between the candidates and the League forum planning. This barrier specifically includes no access to forum questions. If you have a concern about this, please do not hesitate to contact the League at info@lwvnewton.org. In Newton, there are 2 city councilors per ward elected at large, and 1 city councilor per ward elected by voters in that ward only. This forum is for the 1 ward councilor seat in Ward 2, elected only by voters in Ward 2. The City Council has the power to make, amend, or repeal city ordinances, approve the city budget, approve the mayor's expenditure of funds, approve land uses, and confirm the mayor's appointments to Newton's boards and commissions. We will begin by meeting the 2 candidates for Ward 2 Ward Council in alphabetical order. Daniel Gaynor has lived in Newton for all of his life and is the founder of a local technology business. David Micley has lived in Newton for 35 years and is working in business development for a digital asset startup. Let me explain the format for our forum. We will start with an opening statement from each candidate, limited to 1.5 minutes. Then we will pose questions that have been submitted prior to the forum in writing by members of the public. Questions will be addressed to both candidates and will apply to issues or qualifications for their particular office. We will use as many questions as time allows, sometimes combining similar questions, striving to cover a variety of topics. If you don't hear your particular question, it could be combined with other similar questions. Each candidate can respond to questions with a limit of 1.5 minutes, and I, as the moderator, will decide if there is a need for a rebuttal. Final closing statements will be limited to 1 minute. Now let's go to the opening statements, which will be 1.5 minutes in duration, and we will start with Daniel. Daniel, you have 90 seconds.
Hi, I'm Dan Gaynor. I'm a hometown kid who was born, raised, and still lives on Cabot Street. Grew up riding my bike in Edmonds Park, playing Little League next to Cabot School, and getting a free slice of bread at Great Harvest Bread Company on Walnut Street. And I'm running today to give back to the community that shaped me into who I am today. I was thrilled to earn the most votes in the Ward 2 preliminary election and earn the most endorsements thus far, not only from just half the city council, but noted local organizations like Voters for a Vibrant Newton, Progressive Newton, and the Newton Gun Violence Prevention Collaborative. It's a sign that we're building bridges on this campaign around pragmatic, common sense, data-driven policy that rises above ideology and focuses on common sense solutions to some of Newton's toughest challenges. I'm embracing 3 core values in this campaign: walkability, affordability, and sustainability, and those transcend Newton's toughest issues. None is more important or pressing right now than smarter development. I'm focused on holding developers accountable for protecting our priorities, like making sure green space is protected, trees are protected, and most importantly, pedestrian areas are protected, for example, with wider sidewalks. I also want to make sure we're filling our empty storefronts with businesses that not only give us great revenue, but also generate a thriving village. In addition, I'm focused on making sure we've got stronger schools, helping our teachers, as well as, of course, living a more sustainable lifestyle with more, of course, pedestrian-friendly areas, connected bike lanes, connected crosswalks, and safer streets. I look forward to tonight's debate.
Thank you very much. David, you have 90 seconds.
Hi, my name is David Micley, and I'm running to be your city councilor from Ward 2. Good to see you, Dan. Thank you, NewTV and the League for hosting. When I was on the board of the League, I co-hosted our show, The League Presents, right here in this studio, so it's fun to be back. For those of you that don't know about The League Presents, check it out. Marcia Johnson is the host, and she does a phenomenal job keeping Newton voters informed on the issues. Also, shout out to Kathleen Golden and Maureen Meagher for their amazing production work. To start, I'd like to thank the thousands of Ward 2 residents I've met on the campaign trail. You shaped this campaign, sharing your priorities and feedback on what Newton's doing well and how we can improve. I'm running to be an advocate for you. I love this city. My wife and I both grew up here, and our 3 children are the 5th generation of Micleys to call Newton home. My parents live around the corner from us, and it's a personal priority to ensure Newton remains a thriving multi-generational community. After growing up attending local Jewish day schools, I went to Emory University and then came back to Newton, where I started my career as a teacher. Since then, I've gained experience across the public, nonprofit, and private sectors, community organizing for affordable housing in Dorchester, fundraising at Combined Jewish Philanthropies, serving as an elected member of town meeting in Brookline, building education programs in Israel, advising pension funds at Bridgewater, and getting an MBA at MIT. I'm excited to bring the skills from these experiences to City Council and help Newton deliver better on basic city services. If you don't have it yet, my personal cell is 617-413-6330. Text or call anytime. I look forward to tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And now we will start asking our first question. And David, we'll start with you on this one.
Great.
Was there an issue which prompted you to run for office?
Yeah, I think there wasn't a particular issue, more just a commitment to local public service, which I've been interested and active in really since I got back to Newton after college. One of the first things I did when I moved back home as a 23-year-old was reach out to our then alderman, Steve Linsky, to learn about local politics. And I was fascinated and inspired by all the things you could do for your community and really make a difference. I ended up moving to Brookline, got involved there as an elected town meeting member, and then came back to Newton a few years ago, where I ran a few years ago in a race, didn't win, but it was a great opportunity to get involved with things like the board of directors of the League of Women Voters of Newton, which I've been on until I had to resign to run for this campaign. So for me, it's more about using the platform to learn about what residents care about, to advocate for those concerns. I do have priorities that rise to the top of that list, and it starts with better streets and infrastructure. Our streets are in terrible shape and we need to do more to repair them. It also goes along with strong schools. I'm worried about the state of our schools and think we really need to support them better. And also comes back to responsible zoning. Zoning in a way that makes sure we can grow responsibly, but keep the people here that also want to be here. And finally, the biggest thing that drives me to run is constituent services. I love hearing from residents, I love helping out with their concerns, and I love being an advocate for what they want at City Hall. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Dan, the same question for you. Was there an issue which prompted you to run for office?
Yeah, service is at the core of what motivates me, and it's been really the core of my career. I served as a presidential appointee in the Obama administration, working on national security and foreign aid issues. From there, I served as the director of policy for Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley. I've worked on dozens of campaigns, from little small city council races all the way up to Liz Warren's Senate campaign. And in starting my business, I actually help larger corporations adopt better business practices. So trying to drive a more purpose-driven transformation engine, both in my career and for Newton, is really what motivated me to run. There are, of course, several issues as a hometown kid and as somebody who's lived his entire life here that are of great concern to me. I want to make sure that our neighborhoods remain protected, cultivating green space, and also have the walkability necessary, whether you're pushing a stroller or you're just going around the corner for a cup of coffee, to ensure that we have a much safer way of getting around our city. And of course, when you are the father of a Cabot school student, like I will be when my kid gets a little bit older, I want to make sure that our teachers stay in school. We're having a really tough time retaining our younger teachers, and especially as our teachers at the upper end are aging out, we need to make sure that we've got a stronger contract to ensure that our education system remains as good as it was when I was growing up here. We're used to have the best schools and the best day for education, and I wanted to make sure that we can bring that back. And of course, there's no issue more unifying than roads. We need to do better in terms of paving our streets and making them safer to go up and down.
Thank you, Dan. This question number 2 goes to you first.
I'm back.
Yes. Which city council committees would you like to sit on, and what would make you an effective member of these committees?
Zoning and planning, land use, and public safety. From a public safety standpoint, have a career working in government, and although I understand national security policy isn't the exact same as Newton Public Safety, I want to work hand in hand with our police and fire teams to make sure that they're supported, that they have the resources that they need to keep our homes and our people and our kids safe. From a land use and zoning and planning perspective, there's no issue that's more important right now than what the future of Newton looks like. With the MBTA Communities Act, in compelling Newton to pass a new zoning ordinance, we need to make sure that we're balancing progress and preservation of our neighborhoods. When I say progress, that means making sure our villages are more accessible and more affordable for folks at various stages of life, but also various ranges of income, as well as preserving the historic trees, the great little parks like Washington Park off Walnut Street that give Newton the character that makes it such a wonderful place to grow up. So, for those reasons, I'm focused on those issues.
Thank you very much, Dan. David, the question to you: which city council committees would you like to sit on, and what would make you an effective member of those committees?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's 2 that come top of mind. The first is the Finance Committee. Given my background in finance, I studied finance at MIT, where I got my MBA. I worked with sovereign wealth funds and pension funds as an advisor when I was at Bridgewater. I'd really like to take a close look at our budgeting process and make sure that we're spending tax dollars effectively and responsibly. And especially in a year where we had tens of millions of dollars in unexpected cash flows and made cuts to meaningful programs to our schools, I want to take a close look on how that could happen and how we can make sure to spend more responsibly in the future and make sure that funding is directed to basic city services like road repair, like sidewalk repair, the things that everyday citizens use every single day. And another committee that I'd like to join is zoning and planning. Of course, zoning and planning and issues around development is at the forefront of a lot of Ward 2 residents today. There's a lot of changes coming down the pipe, and I want to make sure that the interests and priorities of Ward 2 residents are top of mind so that we can continue to grow responsibly, but keep our small businesses here, keep the local people that have been here and want to stay here for a long time, and also fight for truly affordable housing. I have experienced community organizing for affordable housing in Dorchester, and my push is to fight for getting as much as we can out of every development, using the levers that the city has through the special permit process in large-scale projects so that we can get as much out of it for the city, from affordable housing to mitigation payments to pay for roads in schools, and I would be excited to do that on the Zoning and Planning Committee. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David. We'll start with you with this next question. What is the relationship between transparency and accountability, and how do you rate the City of Newton on this relationship?
Yeah, the relationship between transparency and accountability go hand in hand. It's impossible to keep people accountable if there's not transparency on how decisions are made, who is making them, and what is driving those decisions. I think Newton does some good things with transparency, but I think we have a lot of room for improvement. So maybe first, the things that we do well. It's great that the mayor sends out weekly emails, keeps people informed, keeps people in touch with the issues. But sometimes those emails don't have all the information that we need to know, including who voted what on different issues, what are the various implications, what are the behind-the-scene things going on that leads to a decision being made. And my sense from talking to residents across the ward is that we need to do a much better job in transparency. And again, going back to this year, how we had an override, we had school cuts, and then we discovered tens of millions of dollars in extra cash. There must have been projections, there must have been knowledge about that. Why was that only released at that last moment? Other questions about how we fund special projects, how are they prioritized, how they are prioritized over the basic everyday services that city citizens need. So I think we can do better in transparency. I think there's been some good efforts made. And I'd say finally, we need to think about transparency as an accessibility issue as well. All of the stuff the city produces, the newsletters, the updates, they're in English. There's people that speak other languages besides English as their first language in Newton. We need to translate those materials so that a broader audience can access what the city is doing.
Thank you, David. Dan, would you like me to repeat the question for you?
What's the focus between, or relationship between transparency and accountability?
Yes.
I think it's essential as a Newton City Councilor to be the translator in chief for your neighborhood. What we're dealing with in Newton is nonetheless complicated when it comes to policy issues. A good example of this, which my opponent just raised, is the override. The override would have provided 75% of that money to schools. And because it didn't pass, we're in this very tricky situation where the teachers, the educators, the administrators in our schools are working without a contract right now. Newton schools are our crown jewel. I'm the dad of a future public school student, and I find it unacceptable that our families didn't understand what they were or were not voting for with the override. And while I voted for it, as a city councilor, I would do a much better job in terms of articulating the downstream impacts of efforts like the override to keep our schools as strong as possible. The other thing that we saw this year were surplus funds. My opponent raised it, but to get more specific, we've identified about $55 million in additional money came from Eversource, not necessarily paying their bills when they're using our telephone poles, as well as getting more money from everything from marijuana stores to overnight taxes for hotels. We should be deploying that money in a more transparent fashion. I'd love to see some of those surplus funds used for everything for new HVAC systems, COVID catch-up tutoring for our teachers, and then of course, making sure that our streets are paved faster. I think as a city councilor, we've got to embrace a different style of communication, multilingual, multimedia, and more frequent to make sure that beyond the normal emails, voters know what they're getting out of their tax dollars.
Thank you very much. Dan, we'll start with you on this question. Newton has many boards and commissions made up of talented citizens. Please describe how you have involved and will involve boards and commissions in your work for the city, village, or neighborhood.
Sure. We have amazing boards and commissions. A good example is the Historic Commission. I think they're doing a fabulous job protecting historic trees, protecting historic homes that give the character to our neighborhoods that make Newton a place we're all proud to live in. Another example actually would be the Health Commission, in particular the Biosafety Commission. I'm endorsed by Colonel Gary DeMullen. He's a member of that commission. And when the next pandemic spikes up, we have another COVID outbreak, it will be great to lean on our health experts to understand how and when to keep our schools open, as well as other public facilities that our residents of all incomes and ages depend upon. So I think those are absolutely essential. But I'd actually broaden your question. I'm a member of Green Newton and the Friends of Edmund Park, and I think that the Newton City Council could do a far better job broadening our embrace of advocacy organizations that do a fabulous job in our communities making change happen. So I'd love to see our environmental advocates in particular leaning into stories like how to fix Bellows Pond, which is one act of God away from having a big time flood that could go all the way down Washington Street. I'd love to tap architects and engineers to look at things like the flooding in the library that happened this summer, on the heels of one of the rainiest summers in Massachusetts history that totaled 10 cars, including, unfortunately, my opponents. And of course, I'd love to tap the educators we have. We have a ton of professors and former teachers here in Newton. I'd like to make sure that they have a role in figuring out the most rigorous academic curriculum that also balances the needs of equity, diversity, and inclusion that our schools should be renowned for.
Thank you very much, Dan. David, the same question to you. Newton has many boards and commissions made up of talented citizens. Please describe how you have involved and will involve boards and commissions in your work for the city, village, or neighborhood.
Yeah, it's a great question. So first, I've experienced serving on one of these boards. I'm currently a trustee on Newton's OPEB, which is our liabilities that we owe to city workers for essentially their healthcare costs. And that's an important role for us to oversee and ensure that we're acting responsibly with our budgeting, given this increasing pressure that we're going to experience from pension and OPEB costs. I think there's a few boards that I'd really like to engage more closely with. One is the Economic Development Commission. There's so much opportunity to bring life and vibrancy to our village centers through empowering small businesses, through supporting them, through allowing them to do creative things. And there's times I think we've dropped the ball. One example is in COVID, where it took us way longer than other cities to allow restaurants and small businesses to open up for outdoor seating on sidewalks. I think we need to really be nimble and agile and figure out how we can really help the truly small local businesses, and the Economic Development Commission is a great place to start with that. Also, as my opponent said, there's a lot of groups beyond the boards and commissions that I think should be recognized. Friends of Bellows Pond, they literally saved the trees that are behind the dam that were going to be destroyed. They were going to be cut down in the effort to make a more improved dam, and they saved those trees. That's one of the most beautiful majestic spots in the ward. And I think our groups like that, our groups like Friends of Edmonds Park that clean the trails, that make sure they're well maintained. They're not cleaned by city workers, they're cleaned by everyday residents that use them. I think it's important to empower these people, to lean on them, and to look to them as citizen leaders, which is what they are.
Thank you very much, David. And this question will go to you. As a new city councilor, how do you intend to address your constituents' needs?
Constituent services has been the top priority of my campaign since I announced. The key thing is to be accessible and available. Early on in the campaign, I shared my personal cell phone with residents, and I love hearing your feedback, your questions, and your requests for help. People call me, people text me. I also have an email, micleyfornewton@gmail.com. So it's about communication, it's about being available, but it's about two-way communication. I've also been producing and posting monthly newsletters on my website so that the people that subscribe to my newsletter can see it, but if you don't want to give me your email, you can still see it. It's all there. And I think it's all about transparency. It's about finding ways to engage with people, like also posting a survey on my website, which I passed out to people in the first months of the campaign to get their feedback and input. I am constantly thinking about how I can learn from residents. That's how I started my career. When I was community organizing for affordable housing in Dorchester, I was tasked with a 10-year vision plan for what Common Square of the future would look like. And I needed to get resident input through a pretty sophisticated survey to get their feedback on what the future would be. That's going to be my approach for City Council, especially for the Ward Councilor position, really being on the streets, at the doors, in people's homes, and being available for them to reach you any way that's best for them is key to make sure that the decisions that I'll be making will be informed and influenced and led by resident input.
Thank you very much, David. Dan, the question goes to you. As a new city councilor, how do you intend to address your constituents' needs?
As a lifelong Newton resident, it's been a fantastic journey running for city council in the same streets, on the same parks, with the same neighbors that I grew up with. And at this point in the race, I visited about 10,000 different doors, all the way up to Cheesecake Brook, down to Bolus Pond, from Com Ave, all the way into Newtonville and up onto Austin Street. And one of the things that I've seen is that our community has many different opinions on many different issues. And what you have to do as a city councilor is not only ask great questions, but act on that feedback. Like David, I've also circulated a survey, put out newsletters, put up social media content, appeared at Newtonville Day and the Harvest Fair, and appeared with many different advocacy organizations like the Friends of Edmonds Park to talk about off-leash dog walking, to Green Newton to talk about how we can green our energy here in Newton to 100% renewable. I'm focused on making sure that we embrace community input at every phase of the policymaking process, and none is more important than the upcoming Village Center Overlay District Plan. We need to make sure that we're encapsulating input from across communities, whether you live in a historic district, on a park, or you're just renting and you're a new add to Newton. And importantly, I've done this with businesses. Businesses add so much vibrancy to our communities. I love Union Pharmacy and Mochico Hawaiian and Che Empanadas. But importantly, they add a lot of tax revenue, double the tax revenue for commercial space than residential. They're essential when we fill storefronts to adding revenue to the city, paving our roads faster, and doing better services. I look forward to engaging community members from businesses to voters in that process.
Thank you very much, Dan. Now this question will go to you.
Yep.
Is if there were a vote to be cast that positively affected Newton overall, but was not so positive for your ward, how would you make your decision to vote?
I don't necessarily see a trade-off happening in that kind of context. I believe Newton voters will vote for what's best for their community, and they see their community as beyond just their ward. That said, the ward councilor job is to represent the members of the ward. And if there's any trade-off whatsoever, you've got to side with the folks who live in your neighborhood that you are voted to elect. I do think that the question when it comes to something like embracing safer streets would mean that, for example, I would fight to pave Ward 2 roads faster. When it comes to environmental considerations, I'd make sure to fight flooding in Ward 2 first. When it comes to schools, we need to make sure that folks like at Cabot School or at Newton North are treated well with dignity and respect, and in particular our educators have the benefit of all the support services they need, starting with a fair wage and a great contract. I believe that the job of the ward councilor is to take your residents' input in the most compelling fashion and make a strong policy-driven, data-oriented argument to the rest of the city council so that those trade-offs do not negatively affect our community. I look, for example, to my fellow neighbors in Precinct 1 on the other side of the pike in Ward 2. I was just there today on Court Street, and what I heard from many of them is that some of the development on Washington Street has been onerous, the construction has snarled traffic, and they're afraid that any new development will somehow lessen their home values. I'm very focused on making sure that their voice matters just as much in City Hall as anyone who lives in other parts of the ward, let alone different villages.
Thank you, Dan. David, the question goes to you. If there were a vote to be cast that positively affected Newton overall, but was not so positive for your ward, how would you make your decision to vote?
It's a great question, and I've made this clear since the beginning of the campaign. My heart, my priorities, my interests lie with the residents of Ward 2. And if you think about the way our city power is structured, ward councilors already are less powerful than the at-large councilors. There's 16 at-large councilors and 8 ward councilors, and only 1 ward councilor dedicated to Ward 2. So it is imperative that that minority voice, the voice that represents the neighborhoods at the most local level, stands up for those interests, for those thoughts, for those policy positions. So I think you need to be that voice. You need to be willing to critique a broader city agenda if it doesn't help and if it hurts the residents of the ward that you're representing. So you got to keep the interests of the residents of Ward 2 as a top priority all the time. And to be frank, folks in Ward 2 feel like they've been underappreciated and overlooked, and rightfully so. You can look at recent examples. For example, with the override question and Horace Mann being included on the operating override question, but the 2 other schools having their own questions. That didn't feel great, and just the amount of time and process it took for Horace Mann to finally get this funding, which we should feel good about it finally being there so that we can expand the school properly to accommodate the student population and have classrooms where students can learn in and the acoustics are better. But it took a lot of fighting to get there. There's also the issue of how much development is put in one ward, in one area versus other parts of the city, and you can clearly see that it's not fairly distributed. Ward 2, Newtonville, has a lot of development. It's been great. It's brought in some good things. And with this new rezoning process, rezoning plan, more is coming, but it's not evenly distributed across the city. So I think as a Ward 2 councilor, we need to fight for the ward residents, the ward interests, and that's what I intend to do.
Thank you, David. This question goes to you first. How can the City Council communicate as a whole to the wider Newton community and share information in a clear and understandable way?
It's a great question. I think the city does a number of things to achieve this. There's postings, there's Friday packets, but frankly, a lot of those materials are too dense. So I think the initiatives of various city councilors to make information digestible and accessible is what's key to do that. For example, tonight, during the same time as this forum, the current Ward 2 City Councilor Emily Norden is leading a discussion along with a number of other city councilors on the implications of the rezoning plan for Ward 2 for Newtonville. That's a great opportunity. There's a PowerPoint, there's a conversation, and then what's key is there's a recording after. So people that couldn't attend in person or hear the Zoom can listen to that recording at their convenience and watch and listen and read through easily digestible slides on the implications of everything we're considering. So it's really on city councilors to be that communicator to ensure that the residents know what's going on. And you see some examples of that, and I would definitely invest a lot of time, as I have been on the campaign, in proactively communicating to residents to ensure they are tuned in to what the city is doing.
Thank you, David. Dan, the question to you. How can the City Council communicate as a whole to the wider Newton community and share information in a clear and understandable way?
I've worked professionally in communications for my entire career and often have the task of conveying complicated business or policy issues in a way that's cogent and understandable. I think as a city councilor, like I said, you have to be the translator in chief that breaks up information into digestible nuggets so that the voters here know the downstream impacts of the issues. I believe in somebody who's doing 2 core functions on that front. First, your homework, and second, your hard work. In terms of homework, that means understanding the downstream impacts of policy decisions, not just the talking points of what's hot today, but what the actual implications will be, whether on zoning, the size of the buildings, with environment, how many electric vehicle chargers will be installed, with teacher salaries, what the actual implications will be for our taxes going down the line. The next thing you have to do is really dive into the budget, understand where every one of the $500 million that Newton has in its budget is going to go, and places where we could trim to operate more efficiently and expand, like fixing our roads, to fulfill our priorities. The next thing is I'd love to be able to use technology. We certainly have a lot of great city councilors like Emily Norton who do a wonderful email newsletter. I'd love to look into some multimedia. I'm posting regularly on social media. I think there's great video content we could be creating. We could also be leveraging our advocacy groups to push those out on their platforms as well. The last bit is really about human touch. I believe that from visiting 10,000 voters so far, you've got to meet people at your door, but you should also make it easier for them to come to you. I would host regular office hours and engage students to make sure that we're bringing a nice collective, diverse representation of voters in person to discuss policy issues.
Thank you very much, Dan. We'll start with you on this question. Considering Newton's core values of respect, diversity, and acceptance, what steps have you taken or will you take that enables us to take a serious look at ourselves to ensure that we implement a systemic change to eliminate inequities and injustices?
There's nothing more important to me than this. I've worked closely with the Newton upstanders who are fighting for diversity, equity, and inclusion in our schools. I've worked with Green Newton to make sure that we're thinking about climate justice when it comes to addressing the very terrible and very dangerous issues around climate change. So it's about building communities and coalitions. I learned this firsthand in the Obama administration and working in government. You've got to make sure that you don't have your decision-making process blinded by thinking that you know all the answers. When it comes to Newton, I have tried to run the most positive and policy-oriented campaign in the face of negative attacks from my opponent, who spent over $3,000 putting out negative attacks on me, many of which are outright misinformation and unfortunately not true. I've tried to make sure that we're bringing policy issues in a more digestible way to voters, whether that's hosting discussions with business leaders to figure out what we can do better to bring in local, diverse entrepreneurs and not just benefit the big businesses with the time, the money, the lawyers, and the lobbyists to take over the special permit process. I've worked closely with city staff to make sure that we're supporting them, which are many of them wonderful employees, but they do not have enough support. So how can we attract more talent? And I've worked closely with our teachers to make sure that we're making it easier for them to stay in those schools and work in those schools for decades to come so that they can teach kids like mine who are eventually going to go to Cabot School. Ultimately, our politics sets the tone though, and I'm most proud of the way, in the face of negative attacks, I've stood up and run a positive, policy-oriented, data-driven campaign that's focused on the issues and not the personal.
Thank you, Dan. David, the same question to you. Considering Newton's core values of respect, diversity, and acceptance, what steps have you taken or will you take that enables us to take a serious look at ourselves to ensure that we implement a systemic change to eliminate inequities and injustices?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, I started my career thinking about these issues when I was organizing in Dorchester and seeing social inequality and, you know, figuring out ways that housing and affordable housing can solve these solutions. In Newton, these issues are present as they are anywhere else. I really think it makes sense to also respond to what Dan mentioned about the negative attacks, because I want to clear the air on that. Dan, I like you. I think you're a good guy. When you announced your candidacy, I reached out to you right away and said, let's get coffee. And I've maintained a positive relationship with you every step of the way, constantly texting you, saying how you're doing and checking in. When I shared the news about Boylston Street endorsing you, I didn't intend or say that you wanted the endorsement, that your decision-making was jeopardized. It was in the context of your policies. It was in the context of you being more pro-development by right than me. And that is a difference between us. It's just a difference. Dan supports a proposal that will allow twice as much by right development as what's required. And it was important for me, for voters to know where he stood on that issue because they were confused at the doors, and that there was one developer in particular that was so excited about your stance on that that they decided to endorse you, which is something that no city councilor can remember ever happening in a city election. I still think you're a good guy. I still think you have integrity. I just think that you have a position that's different on development than me, and that was one data point amongst a few others that I was using to make that case. So I would appreciate if you don't reframe everything as a negative attack. It was sharing a fact. It was sharing a relevant fact, an already public and relevant fact. And again, I think you're a good guy. We're both running to try to make our city better. We just have a different view on development, and it's fair for the voters to know that difference.
Is it okay if I address that point?
Yes, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. David has not talked about my endorsements from teachers or longtime homeowners or young families. He took one email from one person that works in real estate and spent $3,000 of his own money to run negative attack ads on me, so filled with inaccuracies that when you did a second run, you changed all the language. From endorse to campaign for to I want thousands more units to I support complying with the plan. David, the clear thing, the story here is that you're running negative attack ads because you hope that they work. And I find it to be unacceptable. It's hard for me to honor the promise that we made to each other when we got coffee to always be positive and to never go personal. This is not information that is in any way an accurate reflection of my stances. I didn't ask for an endorsement. I never took money from them, and I've unequivocally rejected it. Weeks ago, with you, at the debate, you heard me say that. So for you to double down on this storyline gives me great pause and concern as you're arguing that you'll be a great collaborator in the city council. You have to do it from the basis of fact.
Thank you, Dan. You have 30 seconds.
Okay.
Yes.
Dan, again, you're not listening to what I'm saying. I'm not claiming that you asked for the endorsement. I'm not claiming you did anything wrong. That was one data point amongst others, and we can argue about the others. Those are also policy related. Of course you've been endorsed by other people. Of course I'm not going to mention that on my campaign materials. But I didn't think that an endorsement of that level from a developer should be a secret from voters. I thought it was relevant, but also it's not something that I'm overly focused on. What I'm focused on is the policy difference, and that's something that I'm glad to talk about here. We have a policy difference on development. And maybe we should talk about that.
Perhaps we can. In the meantime, I have questions I need to ask you.
Yeah.
David, we'll start with you on this one. What do you think is the most important strategy that Newton can pursue to make the city affordable to live in? And how do you define affordable?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the key is to balance what we need as far as growing the city in multiple types of diverse housing, that's going to allow young families to move in, that's going to allow older people to downsize, while also keeping our levers of oversight over developers that want to build large-scale apartment buildings. So we can even look at the rezoning plan that we're all talking about today. There's parts of it that I love. The MRT districts, for example. The fact that you're able to repurpose existing homes and allow for more development in those areas, so you're not doing tear downs, but building more units, which are great for young families looking to make their start at home in Newton. That's how my wife grew up in Newton, in 2 and 3 family units, Victorians, colonials that were repurposed to multiple units so that young families can make their home there. I support that. I want to see more of that. What I am concerned about, though, is when we allow 5 and 6 story level buildings go up without the oversight of a special permit. It just gives up our ability to have oversight over those developers and to get more out of them. When developers are building projects of that scale, we can demand more affordable housing. We can demand mitigation payments. We can demand payments that go to our affordable housing trust. And I just want to see the city hold onto that lever for large-scale projects while allowing growth to happen around the more small and medium-sized buildings that we need more of.
Thank you, David. Dan, the question to you. What do you think is the most important strategy that Newton can pursue to make the city affordable to live in, and how do you define affordable?
Absolutely. I've worked on throughout my career making housing more affordable and making living in expensive places like Newton more achievable for families at all walks of life. I think when it comes to affordability, I'm proud to be the person in this race who's endorsed by all the folks who are really fighting on the forefront of this. And for example, Engine 6. And the way that you do affordable housing in Newton is you focus on 3 core areas. The first is to look at state-owned buildings. So for example, the Armory over in West Newton, we bought that for $1. It's now 43 fully affordable units. And we bought it for, again, just $1. So it's a great investment. The second is, and you nudged on this, but expanding MRT. When we look at the map, there's a red zone, VC3, a blue zone, VC2. MRT is that green zone where we can retrofit a house that might just be limited now to a 2-family into something like 4 units, 2-bed, 2-bath for a young family or a senior looking to downsize. We also have incentives to discourage teardowns, meaning that if you want to build in the back and you've got the space, you can go up to 6 units in a house. That's the right way to have starter homes here for our families and also a place to downsize for our seniors. The last bit is incentives. What I like about the VCOD plan is that it's got a base affordability requirement. If you go 7 units or bigger in a building, at least one of those has to be offered at an affordable rate, average of 65% AMI, and then as you get bigger, we're going to scale up that affordability percentage to 20% or 1/5, with units being available anywhere from, say, 30% all the way up to 80% AMI. That allows teachers, cops, firefighters, and other public employees to live here and operates along the income spectrum.
All right, thank you very much, Dan. This question will start with you, Dan. Yeah. Traffic congestion is a common complaint in Newton, and it is a justification sometimes provided by those who oppose new housing units. How would you help us ensure that adding new housing will not increase, but rather decrease traffic congestion?
Absolutely. We are recording here at NewTV Studios, and if anybody knows where that is, that's on Needham Street. And if you've driven down Needham Street, I can guarantee one thing to you and one thing for certain: it took you a long time, and it was bumpy. I want to make sure that Newton is an easy place to get to, but it's also greener to get around. The core concept that will reduce traffic is 15-minute villages. The reason I'm supportive, and I do have tweaks, of the Village Center Overlay District Plan is that it fosters more small businesses to fill our empty storefronts, allowing you to get your dry cleaning done, go to the salon, get your dog cleaned up, and grab a great Italian meal from Camella's over on Bramway in Newtonville. I love the idea that I can park in one spot and walk around a village versus jumping place to place in my car. So it's not like we're going to reduce cars overall from being in Newton, but if we can reduce car trips by fostering more commercial density in our villages, we'll have a way to ensure that more people can get more done in a smaller amount of space and only need to use their car a few times a day. I think we'd all love to have to drive less to get our stuff done, to pick up our kids, to take them to school or to daycare, and most importantly, to grab a quick dinner when the day's getting away from us. So that's absolutely essential. It also comes down to some green improvements. I'd like to connect bike lanes, make crosswalks safer, widen sidewalks, and facilitate other pedestrian improvements that make it easier and indeed safer to walk around our town, not just have to drive around it.
Thank you very much, Dan. David, the question to you. Traffic congestion is a common complaint in Newton, and it is a justification sometimes provided by those who oppose new housing units. How would you help us ensure that adding new housing will not increase, but rather decrease traffic congestion?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair concern, and I don't want to mislead residents and advertise to them that if we build a lot, there's going to be less traffic. There will be more traffic, and we're going to have to deal with it, which is why I think we should take the moderate step to do what the MBTA Act is requiring of us, which is a lot, and see how that unfolds and see how we deal with that traffic, and not just traffic, but deal with the increased capacity. Our fields are already being overused. How can we handle those? And if we can handle more, let's do more. But I do think there's also steps we can take to reduce traffic while also allowing for this increase of growth that meets the MBTA Requirement Act. One is we can shut down main streets during certain times of increased commerce and increased social activity. Village Day in Newtonville was an incredible experience to have people walking around, engaging with each other, engaging with the stores. Why do we have to do that once a year? We can do that more than once a year. Same with side streets on different parts of the city. Bullo's Pond, for example. Imagine if we shut that down to cars from 4 to 6 p.m. on a Sunday evening and allow people to hang out there, have a drink, socialize with their neighbors, see their friends. So I think there's ways we can create areas where people can congregate, come together, and reduce car traffic during targeted times that will bring our community together. But I also think we need to be aware that if we grow too fast all at once, we will have traffic that will be very hard to handle.
Thank you very much, David. This question goes to you first. Land use is just one governance of many in our city. What other issues or opportunities are important to you in Newton, and what skills do you bring to bear upon them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, the kind of top priorities are the streets and infrastructure, which is a personal pain point. As Dan mentioned earlier, my car was one of the 100 that was in the library parking lot that was flooded and totaled. And I have a background in finance, so I would want to use that background to really take a close look at which special projects we're funding and which ones make sense to fund or not. I also went to Livingston Cove today. That project was supposed to be done, I think, in June. It's still a work in progress. It's a $2.2 million project. Is that the best use of funds? I'm not sure. The jury, is still out on it. We have to see what it looks like and see what sort of experience it gives residents. But I would really want to use my background in finance to make sure that we're investing appropriately in the basic city services and being, quite carefully critical and constructively critical on the more ambitious special projects that the city sometimes pursues. Beyond that, I have a background as an educator. I started my career as a teacher. My wife was a social worker at Bigelow. My sister-in-law is a former Newton Public School educator. My mom is a teacher. My grandmother's a teacher. Education is in my family's life. And even though I'm not running for school committee, I still think that city councilors have a responsibility to speak out and speak for our schools so that we can support our teachers better, support our students better, and ensure that Newton is a desirable place of learning at our public schools for all students. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Dan, the question to you. Land use is just one governance of many in our city. What other issues or opportunities are important to you in Newton, and what skills do you bring to bear upon them?
I appreciate you asking this. Zoning absolutely has sucked up the oxygen in our town right now, but one thing that's interesting is the new plan, the VCOD plan, will be decided before either of us, regardless of who wins, is actually inaugurated into the city council seat. So the other priorities I'm thinking about long term are, number one, making sure that we welcome small, independent businesses and diverse entrepreneurs to Newton, not just the big corporations, as I mentioned, those with the time, money, and staff to get through the system. I love to, for example, help more chains like Los Amigos, Mochico, Union Pharmacy, Mita, and all the great new places, including the new Feast and Federal on Washington Street, that help our community eat better, live better, and have a more walkable lifestyle. I'm the only business owner on the stage. I'm the only job creator in this race, and I think I'd have skills to bear in terms of making it easier to navigate our very difficult and onerous business permitting process. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a career climate change advocate. I think we need a Bill Belichick style offensive and defensive plan on climate change. Offensively, I think that means everything from more solar panels to electric vehicle chargers to wastewater mitigation, and of course wider sidewalks, safer crosswalks, and repaving our roads. Critical to that is making sure that we're integrating infrastructure improvements. Too often we pave a road and they have to tear it up again to put new gas pipelines underneath. I think we can save money as well as save headaches by having those two things coordinated. And of course, as the father of a future Cabot School student, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that our teachers are operating without a contract. Their cost of living adjustment this year was 2%, inflation was 4%. We need to do better to make sure our public employees can work here safely and continuously for the sake of our students.
Thank you very much, Dan. This could probably dovetail on that. We'll start with you. How would you encourage and improve the safety of walking and bicycling in Newton and increase the use of public transit?
I'm a longtime biker. I'm a longtime walkability advocate. I think it's absolutely essential that we do what it's possible, and cold weather coming up might be a little difficult, to make Newton a safer place to walk around and to bike around. That starts, of course, as I mentioned, with better streetscapes. I like wider sidewalks with benches and outdoor seatings for local business. Newtonville's new improvement plan, I think, has been a stellar advancement on that front. We also know that biking around Newton is way too unsafe. The quality of our roads is one thing. It's very unsafe to just even bike down the street. But we also saw this summer one of our residents unfortunately get in an accident that was fatal, and that is absolutely unacceptable. If we want to make it more attractive to bike, we've got to make it safer to bike. So that means looking at separated bike lanes, which are under consideration on the Washington Street corridor, as well as connecting our bike lanes so we have one integrated network that you're able to get around Newton, totally separate from traffic and much safer. And this is essential because otherwise bikers are forced into traffic or onto sidewalks, which if you're pushing a stroller like me all the time is very unsafe, or if you're a biker like me at other times is very unsafe to head into traffic. So I'm very focused on those two things. The other thing I would say is we've got to make sure we're upkeeping our parks. Edmonds Park, as I mentioned, is a crown jewel of this city. I'm a member of Friends of Edmonds Park. I want to make sure that we're keeping our trails updated and clean. The same thing goes for Cold Spring Park, for the trails around Bellows Pond, and of course, our amazing Crystal Lake. While not in our ward, it's a place that I'd love to go, and I want to make it easier to walk around that in a circle.
Thank you very much, Dan. David, the question goes to you. How would you encourage and improve the safety of walking and bicycling in Newton and increase the use of public transit?
Yeah, biking and bike safety is a huge personal concern for me. I bike my kids to school almost every single day. You can see me going down the carriage lane. I have a trailer in the back, 2 of them in there. At least while campaign season is going on, there's a sign there, so feel free to say hi. We can talk about the campaign, talk about whatever you want if you see me. But it's very hard to find a consistent connected path that feels safe in Newton. So I live on Mill Street, and if I want to take my kids to school, they go to Temple Shalom, I go down the carriage lane for most of the way, which honestly is a pretty good place to bike. It's pretty well protected. But if I manage to get my kids up early enough and want to go to Starbucks on the way to get them breakfast, that means turning onto Walnut Street, which has a bike lane that's not protected at all with cars going really fast. Doesn't feel so safe. And then once you get into the heart of Newtonville, the bike lane just disappears and you merge with traffic. It's not a reassuring way to bike to school. It's not a reassuring way to bike with kids. And there's not enough places where people can bike and bike to where they need to go in a full A to B path that is connected and protected. And we need to make sure to create those connected and protected bike lanes across the city. As far as walkability goes, I think there's things we can do, which I sort of alluded to before, in terms of shutting down certain roads to traffic on certain times of the day when it is more advantageous to have walkers socialize, community members gather. Bullo's Pond, we can close off traffic 4 to 6 on Sundays, like the way they do a Memorial Drive in Cambridge on certain Sundays throughout the summer. I think we can do more of that in Newton to encourage walkability in a targeted way when people are actually going to walk and take advantage of the streets.
Great. Thank you both very much. It's now time to go to our closing statements. And David, we will start with you. You have 1 minute.
When I first announced my campaign, I didn't seek endorsements. Rather, I started knocking on doors and asking residents for their input by passing out a survey because I wanted resident engagement to be at the heart of this campaign. I hear residents are frustrated with the state of our streets. I am committed to fighting for increased funding to our Department of Public Works so we can improve our streets faster and quicker. I hear residents are concerned about the state of our schools. I will advocate for reasonable class sizes, better mental health support, a rigorous academic environment, and fair pay for our teachers so we can attract and retain the best. And I hear residents want a balanced approach to development and growth, where Newton gets to lead the decision-making rather than developers. And that's why I'm committed to advocating for us to meet but not exceed the MBTA Communities Act as a next step we can all get behind and be proud of. And most of all, I'm running to help. I love hearing from residents throughout the campaign. Please continue to reach out. My wife makes fun of me for doing this, but here it is again, 617-413-6330. That's my personal cell. Call or text anytime. My name is David Micley, and I hope to earn your vote on or before November 7th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Dan, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Well, let's start with the most important thing. My phone number, 617-947-8550. My email, dan@gaynorforma.com. One of the things that I've seen in talking to over 10,000 different residents at their doorsteps and calling many, many more is that Newton requires a transparent, communication-oriented, and data-driven representative to understand the downstream effects of all the issues facing Ward 2. It starts with schools. We've got to do better in terms of attracting and retaining our top talent. That is our educators. I would work hand in hand with our teachers to make sure they get a fair contract that keeps pace with cost of living. When it comes to development, I'll focus on holding developers accountable for protecting our priorities, expanding the MRT zone to make sure that we've got more townhouses rather than big buildings, and making sure above all that we protect our green spaces, like replacing the 20,000 trees we've lost since the 80s. Lastly, but not least, I want to make sure that Newton is a place that can mitigate some of the dangerous effects of climate change so it's a safer and more walkable place for kids like mine. I look forward to earning your vote in the Ward 2 election on November 7th, and thank you for your support.
Thank you. I would like to thank both of our candidates for participating. I also want to thank NewTV and the League of Women Voters of Newton for providing this opportunity for candidates to make themselves known. And thank you to the audience for all the questions you sent. Let me remind the audience that both these candidates are running for Ward 2 Ward Councilor. Only Newton voters in Ward 2 may vote for one of these two candidates. The polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you will not be able to get to the polls on November 7th, you can vote absentee or early by mail or in person. For further information, call the Newton Election Commission at 617-796-1350. If you don't know where your polling location is, you can call the Newton Election Commission or visit the city's website at newtonma.gov. On the Election Department page, you can verify your polling location. Be sure to check the Newton League's website at lwvnewton.org for more information in their online voters guide. Today's forum is a co-production of NewTV and the League of Women Voters of Newton. Any use or reuse of this program requires the approval of NewTV and the League and must be shown in its entirety without any editing only after the program initially airs on NewTV. The League of Women Voters of Newton is a nonpartisan political organization that promotes informed and active participation in government. The League does not support or oppose specific candidates or political parties. It does, however, take positions and advocate for issues that it has studied. Membership in the League is open to all people. For more information, contact or visit lwvnewton.org. NewTV is Newton's award-winning state-of-the-art media center, specializing in television production, training, and building community partnerships. It is Newton's primary source of locally relevant programming. Membership in NewTV is open to all Newton residents. For more information, call 617-965-7200 or visit the website at newtv.org. I'm Jen Adams for the League of Women Voters and NewTV, and I thank you for watching. Participate in our elections, and remember, democracy is not a spectator sport.